Thank you so much, Rabbi Stern. That was a generous and kind introduction. And welcome to everyone here. I'm sure people couldn't wait to get back to synagogue after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. Someone said to me the other day that you must be very happy the holidays are over. I said, no, actually I'm very sad because the holidays are so wonderful. I wish it would just keep on going on and on and on. But we're here tonight for a serious topic, and one which is not easy to deal with. I'm hoping that tonight we'll be able to shed some light on this issue, and hopefully the community will begin to see, as we title this program, the light at the end of the tunnel. Every year on Passover, during the Passover Seder, we recite one of the lines that's very well known, B'chol dor v'dor, omdim aleinu l'chalotenu. In each generation, our enemies have risen up in order to destroy us. This has been the perennial reality of Jewish history. There have been no dearth of enemies spent on destroying the Jewish people physically. Unfortunately, today, probably the greatest threats to Jewish continuity are primarily internal, meaning that the problems are more self-inflicted than external. Assimilation has grown to the point where not long ago there was a full-page advertisement in a Jewish periodical that gloomingly predicted that if you're Jewish, chances are your grandchildren won't be. And for, unfortunately, a great number of Jewish people today, that is the sad reality. In 1990, there was a Jewish population study out of New York that found 12% of American Jews were practicing a religion other than Judaism. So these are people who are ethnically, biologically, in terms of their family, they were born to Jewish families, but the religion they associated with was not Judaism. In North America, the default religion would be obviously Christianity, but again, increasingly Jews today attracted to New Age religious groups, to Buddhism, etc. By the year 2000, just 10 years later, that number grew to 25% of American Jewry. Not 12% in 1990, 25% by the year 2000 of American Jews affiliating, associating, identifying themselves with a religion other than Judaism. As well, by the year 1990, the majority of Jews in the United States that were getting married were marrying non-Jews by the year 1990. And so today, more children are being raised today in mixed households than they are in homes with two Jewish parents. That's where we sit today at this time. And so for some Jewish people, reading the marriage announcements in the newspapers, as Rabbi Stern alluded to, has become more depressing than reading the obituaries. Now, when we think about this potential demographic Armageddon that we face, we have to, above all, be honest with ourselves. They tell a story of two men who were injured in a motorcycle accident, brought to the emergency room, and they were lying on the gurneys, and the emergency room physician came in to examine them. He walks over to one of the people, he starts to touch his knee and touch his leg, and he lets out a scream. He hits the ceiling. The poor person couldn't be stopped. He was screaming so hard, the doctor had to leave the room. A few minutes later, the doctor came back and went over to his friend, to the other fellow, and again went over to his leg, started touching the leg, and the guy doesn't make a sound. And the doctor's palpitating the leg and pushing here and giving a press here. The fellow doesn't make a peep. The doctor again leaves the room, and the first fellow says to his friend, I don't understand. The doctor just touched me lightly, and I was in such great pain. It was incredible. I couldn't take it. And here he is, he's pushing you and jumping you, and he's pressing you, and you're not moving, you're not making a sound. So his friend says to him, are you crazy? After I saw what happened to you, you think I was going to show him the bad leg? No way. When I was growing up in the 1960s, I guess I'm what you would call a baby boomer, the intermarriage rate was approximately 6%. Today, it's approaching 60%. And as Rabbi Stern mentioned, even here in Canada, some places way beyond that. I was in Calgary not long ago. One of the rabbis in Calgary told me that in his town, the intermarriage rate was approaching 90%. So of Jews getting married now in Calgary, and I'm sure in places like Edmonton, in Winnipeg, possibly Vancouver, other places in Canada, we're now being told that the intermarriage rate is almost 9 out of 10. Between 1960 and the year 2000, another change took place. In the 1960s, when a Jew married a non-Jew, approximately 20% of the non-Jewish partners would convert to Judaism. Today, that number has dropped to about 5%. So not only has the rate of intermarriage grown dramatically, but the rate of the non-Jewish partners embracing Judaism has decreased dramatically as well. One of the results of these trends has been a growing acceptance in the Jewish community of intermarriage. Once there was a time when parents would make it very clear to their children that they would not accept a non-Jewish partner. Today, surveys have found that only 20% of Jewish parents strongly oppose intermarriage. 80% of Jewish parents don't really give that message to their children at all. Now, I could spend the next hour with you sharing the results of many, many studies that have been done. It's not the point of my talk here tonight. Let me just share with you some of the results that have come out of a number of recent surveys. Again, I don't necessarily hold all statistical surveys as being 1,000% true, but my basic theory in life is that where there's smoke, there's fire, and these are indicators of the general trends. One of the studies reported that in intermarried families in North America, 28% of the children are being raised as Jews, 41% are being raised as Christians, 31% with no religion whatsoever. In these mixed marriages, 20% of the students, of the children, are receiving some form of Jewish education. The quality we'll not discuss right now, as opposed to approximately 70% of families where both parents are Jewish who give the children at least some Jewish education. Of the children in mixed marriages, only 24% identify themselves as Jews. 81% say it's not really that important to be part of the Jewish community. And the most disturbing statistic is, and this has been borne out in many studies, that over 90% of the children of intermarried families will themselves intermarry. In one 3-generational study that was done in Philadelphia, none of the grandchildren of mixed marriages identified as Jews. In truth, I don't believe that intermarriage is really the problem we need to deal with. I believe that ultimately intermarriage is a symptom of the real underlying problem. When I was growing up, I was born in 1953. I was definitely a child of the 60s. I would have many, many teenage arguments and discussions with my parents about interdating and intermarriage, and I would want to know, like, what is the hang-up and what's the problem with dating non-Jews and even marrying non-Jews? And my parents would say, because you're Jewish and Jews don't marry non-Jews. And I would say, why? They said, because you're Jewish and Jews don't. But why don't we? Because you're Jewish. And you can hear how incredibly convincing and compelling this must have been to a teenager. Before I left for university, I had a meeting, actually my first meeting in my life, with a rabbi. And the question of interdating came up, and I wanted to know what the rabbi's take was. The rabbi explained to me that the problem with intermarriage was that if all Jews would marry non-Jews, then the Jewish people would basically no longer exist, we'd disappear. The rabbi assumed that this was a slam dunk and that his case was made, and my reaction was simply, so what? So what if all the Jewish people disappear? Will somehow the ecosystem no longer be able to function without Jewish people in the world? Will somehow the world come crashing down if there are no more Jewish people in the world? Why was it so crucial and critical for Jewish people to survive? The rabbi took this as a given. My thought was, are we living in a world where life and history is some bizarre contest where the longest living religion at the end of history wins? Is that the purpose of Jewish survival? And to me, the Jewish taboos against interdating and intermarriage smacked of racism. And today, many, many young Jewish people feel exactly the same way. Now let's fast forward to the year 1997. I went to Windsor, Ontario. I was invited to speak to a group of Jewish law students. The topic I was given was the threat of Jews for Jesus and Christian missionaries to the Jewish community. And I was in the middle of my presentation. And one of the young students, a young woman, interrupted me. And she said, "Rabbi, none of us are really that interested in this topic of Christian missionaries. What we really want to understand is, why shouldn't we date non-Jews? Why shouldn't we marry non-Jews?" And that was the question that she said she was really concerned with, and that was the question she thought her group would really want to hear about. I said to her, "It's an important issue, but you're asking the wrong question." She said, "What do you mean I'm asking the wrong question?" I said, "If you're asking me at this stage in your life why you shouldn't marry or date non-Jews, it's not the right question. So what should I be asking?" she wanted to know. I said, "The question that you really have to answer, the critical question is, why should you be Jewish? You have to clarify yourself, is there really a good reason for me to be a Jew?" And I said to her that if for you Judaism is profoundly meaningful and fulfilling and compelling, and so much so that you have to wrap your entire life around it so that it becomes the center and the organizing force of your life, if that's your understanding and embrace of Judaism, then I really won't have to give you any reasons for why it wouldn't make sense for you to marry someone who wasn't Jewish. I believe that Dennis Prager said it very well. He said, if Judaism is important, then no arguments against intermarriage are necessary. But if Judaism isn't important, then no arguments against intermarriage will be effective. Let's go a little bit deeper. And I want you to listen to what I'm going to say now very carefully. When I was in the market looking to date, looking to get married, I wasn't only eliminating non-Jews as potential dates. I wouldn't have considered dating Jews who didn't take Judaism seriously. This is not a racial issue. The only problem with the non-Jew is that they don't take Judaism seriously. The non-Jew does not commit him, herself, or herself to living Jewishly. Judaism is not the center of the life of the non-Jew. And that's why they don't make an appropriate marriage partner for someone who wraps themselves around Judaism and who makes Judaism the center of their life. But that same problem applies to a tremendously large number of Jews as well. There's nothing wrong with the Gentile. There's nothing wrong with the non-Jew. The same problem with marrying the non-Jew, when you really understand the problem, applies to, unfortunately, a vast number of Jewish people in the world today as well. If the non-Jew became interested in Judaism and committed themselves to Judaism, then they would make a perfectly good and fine marriage partner. Racism is absolutely no part of the calculus. It's simply a question of, what am I committed to? Who am I? What do I wrap my life around? When I speak with the parents of people who are about to intermarry, and unfortunately I get a lot of these late phone calls, usually much too late in the game. But when I speak to these parents, I usually ask them to tell me something about their son or daughter's Jewish involvement. The parents usually give me a history of their children's Hebrew schooling, of their bar bat mitzvah, maybe of their trips to Israel as a teenager, maybe the Jewish summer camp they went to. I ask the parents, but what are they doing now? Now that they're at university, or now that they're out of school and working? What are they doing now, Jewishly? And the parents tell me that they come home for Rosh Hashanah, they come home for the Passover Seder, they might come home once in a while for a Shabbat dinner, if the circumstances allow. And I say, that's great, that's wonderful. But what are their children doing when they're not with you? What did they do last week, Jewishly? How much is Judaism part of your son or daughter's daily life? Think about a CEO of a company. Think about the person that runs a large company. How often are they aware of the fact that they're a CEO? Does the fact that they're a CEO of a company animate them? Does it affect almost every single thing they do during the day? How about someone who's a parent? Is the fact that they're a parent of a young child something which they think about once in a while? Or is the fact that someone is a spouse or a parent a defining characteristic of who they are, that it affects virtually every single thing they do, every single moment of the day? A mother may not be with her child, but the mother knows that she has a child and where the child is and who's taking care of the child. The mother is never disconnected from her child. Now, to be truthful, Judaism was also not so much a part of the daily life of baby boomers either. Even back when intermarriage rates were only about 6%, we're not talking about a generation of people who lived Judaism 24/7. So why is it that back then, even though Judaism may not have been a part of people's lives 24 hours a day, the intermarriage rate was so low, and today, as well, Judaism does not define most Jews in our generation. The intermarriage rate has climbed up 10 times that number. Now, clearly, there's a generational thing going on. And this partially accounts for why the assimilation rates are generally a bit lower in Canada than they are down south of the border in the US. But to understand this generational reality, let's think about something. And again, let's be honest with ourselves. Too many families today are living off the dividends and the savings in their Jewish spiritual banks. There was a time when Jewish families invested heavily in Judaism. They sacrificed for Judaism. They saved and they put away for a rainy day. Our generation has been living off of those savings. and not replenishing the account. And so with less and less gas in the tank, we find ourselves coasting, often coasting just on the fumes. Another thing to realize is that the challenges to Jewish continuity are much greater today than they were 40 years ago. Those of you who were young in your 20s or 30s 40 years ago. And we're only able to pass on a commitment to Judaism and a willingness to sacrifice for it if we are serious about it and deeply committed to it and steeped in it ourselves. And again, let's be honest with ourselves. What are we really asking the next generation to do? We're sending off young people to university, and we're expecting them to essentially write off, eliminate, reject over 95% of the potential dating pool they can date. We live in a world that's a very alienated world. People really want to have relationships. They want to have people that they can have a close relationship with. They want to have a spouse, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. They want to have a partner. It's very difficult to find someone that you can fall in love with. It's extremely difficult. And into a world where it's so hard for people to find their matches, we send off young Jews and we expect them to make a sacrifice where they're willing to say, over 95% of the people that I am going to meet, I will reject out of hand. I will not consider dating them. What must it take for someone to make that sacrifice? Why would they ever make such a sacrifice? Because it's going to hurt mommy and daddy if I come home with a non-Jew? That does not cut it these days. Young Jewish people say to themselves, and they're quite correct, mommy and daddy will have to just get used to it. They'll have to deal with it. It's my life. And so the fear of letting down parents is not stopping young Jewish people from intermarrying. But as I said, we can't expect young people to have that level of commitment, to be willing to sacrifice for it, if we don't have a very deep, profound level of commitment and attachment to Judaism ourselves. They tell a story of someone who had a job working at a railroad crossing. And he had to make sure that if trains were coming through, no motorists would come in the opposite direction. And one night he heard the horn, the blasting horn of a train coming from the distance. And he sees the headlight of a car coming in the other direction. So he goes into his booth, he grabs the lantern, and he waves this lantern back and forth. The car isn't slowing down. And the signal man is panicking. What's happening? So he starts waving the lantern faster and faster. The car does not stop. It goes through the intersection. At the same time, the train arrives. The train runs over this motorist, squashes the car. The motorist is killed. And the family of the driver sues the train company for $16 million. At the trial, the star witness is this signalman. They call him to the stand. They ask him what happened that night. And he explains that he saw the train coming. He heard the blasting horn of the train. He saw the headlights of the car. He grabbed his lantern. He waved it back and forth. Unfortunately, the car never stopped. On the basis of this testimony, the train company won the trial. They did not have to pay the $16 million. The president of the company was thrilled. He walks over to this man, and this man is sitting in his seat, slumped over. He has tears coming out of his eyes. The president says, "What's wrong?" He says, "You should be thrilled. You won the case for us." The man looks at the president and says, "Sir, I don't know what I would have said had anyone bothered asking me, was your lantern lit?" In the more than 30 years that I've been doing counseling with Jews who have embraced other religions, with Jews who are intermarrying, with Jews who become, in the words of Shlomo Carlebach, Jews for nothing, I found that all of these people have something in common. very unsophisticated levels of understanding what Judaism is, and very superficial Jewish experiences. These two are a deadly combination. Our prophets already cried out in the Bible over 2,500 years ago, "My people perish due to a lack of knowledge." We certainly can't expect people to develop a deep attachment to Judaism, so deep and profound that they're willing to sacrifice for it, if their understanding of Judaism is so incredibly shallow. One of the things I've done for years is administer to university students a Jewish IQ test. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, it's not a real IQ test, but it illustrates something that's very, very significant. I asked Jewish university students who the mother of Jesus was. A surprisingly high number of Jewish students know at least what Christians believe to be the name of the mother of Jesus, Mary. I asked these same Jewish students, what is the name of the mother of Moses? Virtually no student has ever known that. I asked Jewish students today, who is Lady Gaga? Of course, anyone that has a pulse on the planet has heard of Lady Gaga. I asked Jewish students, who was Deborah in the Bible? I haven't met many Jewish students who knew who Deborah was. I asked Jewish university students, can you name any of the 4 Gospels in the Christian Bible? And you'd be surprised how many Jewish students can say, oh yeah, I think there's a Matthew, a John, a Luke, a Mark. I asked these same Jewish students, can you name any of the tractates of the Babylonian Talmud? Our books. Most Jewish university students cannot name any of these books. We asked Jewish university students, can you name the author of Das Kapital? Most university students can do that. Ask the same students who wrote the Guide to the Perplexed. Far fewer students can name the author of that. Ask Jewish people today, have they heard of Nostradamus? Do they know who Nostradamus was? Yes, virtually everyone. Do they know who Uncleus was? They don't know who Uncleus was. Ask Jewish university students what date is celebrated as the birthday of Jesus. Most Jewish university students will know about December 25th. Ask the same Jewish university students what day was the day that Moses was born. I've almost never met a Jewish university student who knew that. Ask a Canadian Jewish university students what is a hat trick. It's hard to find a Canadian who doesn't know what a hat trick is. Ask them if they know what a Siyum Hashas is. They probably won't know that. Ask Jewish university students if they know what the Trinity is, what the Trinity refers to. They probably know exactly what that refers to. Ask them what the word Taryag refers to. They probably won't know that. Ask Jewish students in Canada who was the first Prime Minister of Canada. Probably many, if not most, will know that. Ask who was the first king of Israel. Probably very few would know that. While many of our students have learned a smattering of Hebrew, some Bible stories, a little bit of Jewish history, and some of the customs of the holidays, but very few of our students have ever been exposed to the profoundly deep philosophical and mystical teachings of Judaism, to the beauty of the sophisticated wisdom of Judaism, to the writings of the Maharal Miprag, of the Sfas Emes, of the Kuzari, of Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, of any of the great Jewish thinkers over the past 2,000 years. Most of our Jewish students have not been exposed to this treasure chest whatsoever. What a crime and what a tragedy. Often, Jewish identity is defined negatively. I often ask Jewish university students, what is the definition of a Jew? You'd be surprised how many times I'm told a Jew is someone who does not believe in Jesus. Now, aside from the fact that it's an absurd answer because there are countless people on the planet who don't believe in Jesus that aren't Jewish, but how sad it is that so many Jewish people define themselves negatively by what they don't believe. And I ask them, okay, so a Jew is someone who doesn't believe in Jesus, but what do you believe? What are your beliefs? And so often Jewish students are unable to articulate even the basic beliefs of Judaism. We encourage our children to get advanced secular degrees. Very few Jewish families proudly put on the wall their child's high school diploma. Most Jewish families expect university and obviously today graduate school education. We wouldn't think of sending our children into the world with less. And yet we're satisfied, unfortunately, with a mediocre level of Jewish knowledge that we think naively will compete with everything else they're going to be exposed to in the world today. The truth is that very few Jewish people really abandon Judaism because so few Jewish people really know much about it at all. And then I mentioned, aside from shallow levels of Jewish education, I mentioned superficial Jewish spiritual experiences. For so many Jewish people, synagogue experiences are not very moving. They're often described as boring. It's very rare that we'll see people crying in a synagogue. For so many Jewish people, prayer is simply reading words out of a book. And so many Jewish people are surprised when I tell them, you can pray in your own language. You can actually speak to God using your own words. Really? We can do that? That's allowed? If we look at the trajectory of the typical Jew who becomes a Christian today, or a Buddhist, or a Sufi, or a Sikh, or a Hindu, and you ask them, what was your Jewish upbringing like? They'll tell you that they went to Hebrew school, they had a bar bat mitzvah, they lit Hanukkah candles, they had family seders for Passover, they may have gone to a Jewish summer camp or on a trip to Israel. But they'll tell you that they never experienced any of those experiences as spiritual. They will tell you that for them Judaism was cultural, it was an ethnicity, it was a heritage, it was an identity. But they'll say they don't remember, they never experienced anything in their Jewish upbringing that they experienced as a spiritual experience. About 100 years ago, there was a young intellectual Jew in Germany who also felt that Judaism was empty and not spiritual. And he decided to convert to a truly spiritual religion. His decision was to become a Christian. And so Franz Rosenzweig was about to go to be baptized, but he decided that before he gets baptized, he will give Judaism one last try. And so Rosenzweig walked into a little synagogue in Germany. His mazel, it happened to be the evening of Yom Kippur. It was the evening of Kol Nidre. And something extremely powerful must have been going on in that little synagogue that Franz Rosenzweig walked into in Germany 100 years ago. Because he walked out resolving not to continue with his decision to convert to Christianity, but rather to dedicate his life to pursuing Judaism. That must have been some synagogue experience. But whenever I think of that story, I ask myself, what would it be like if today, if this Shabbat, a young person in Toronto, about to convert to another religion, decided to give Judaism one last chance, and just walked into a synagogue here in Toronto? Would the experience they had in a typical Torontonian synagogue, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, turn them around? Would it be so deep and inspiring and moving and passionate and emotional and mystical and godly that they would say, wow, this is where I'm going to stay. This is where I belong. When I went to India in 1998 to make Passover seders for Israeli travelers, I had a young woman sitting next to me We sat for 8 hours there on the floor of an old hotel in India. This woman had come to India 3 years prior to live. She came from California. She's living in a town in northern India that had running sewage going through the town. And I asked her, how is it that you came to live here in India? She told me that when she was in California, she tried to find spirituality in Judaism. And she went from synagogue to synagogue. And she told me what her experience was basically this committee and this meeting and this brotherhood and this sisterhood and another meeting and another committee. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, you know, I was just looking to be able to go to a place where I could feel reverent. A place where I could go and sit and feel that I was sitting in the presence of God. Back to our question. Can Judaism really be that important that we can wrap our entire life around it? Can Judaism be that compelling that it's really worth preserving and sacrificing for? You know, for children, the ultimate selling points of Judaism are not easily communicated nor appreciated. Little kids really don't have the ability to appreciate and understand the deeper aspects of Judaism. For children, Jewish life has to be enjoyable, warm, loving, and experienced in a supportive family environment. And so when Jewish education and Jewish experiences stop at that formative age, and there's never an exposure to the deeper, more mature and compelling ideas of Judaism, it's like someone who grows up as a child playing Go Fish or Old Maid and thinks that they're going to be able to play those games in their 30s and 40s and 50s. People have to develop, as they get older, more sophisticated, more advanced, more mature ways of experiencing the world. It's hard to imagine Old Maid and Go Fish capturing someone's imagination and their attention when they're in their 30s and 40s. At the end of the day, Judaism has to be lived and experienced. It has to be caught and not taught. But there are some core ideas of Judaism that unfortunately are never conveyed to young people. There was a wonderful book written a few years ago by Abigail Pogrebin, I think that's how her name is pronounced. She wrote a book called The Stars of David. She interviewed dozens and dozens of famous Jews across the world and wanted to hear their reports about being Jewish. After she finished the book, she wrote the following. She wrote, "A funny thing happened on my way to finishing this book. I became more Jewish. I'm not saying now that I keep kosher or I pray every morning. What I mean is that I've become more stirred by Judaism. I've become more stirred by Judaism. More impatient to understand it. More surprised by how preoccupying it is. Surprised at how preoccupying it can be. Less baffled by those who prioritize it. Judaism has become a richer piece of my life. Over the course of the last 2 years, as I listened to one prominent person after another describe how onerous Hebrew school was, how readily they left religion behind after their bar or bat mitzvah day, how boring they found synagogue, how unaffected they are by prayer, the more I heard those reports, the more I felt drawn to understand the religion myself. The more I heard Jewishness described as a gut connection, a shared history, a value system, a vibrant culture, but not in terms of ritual or liturgy, the more I felt pulled toward exactly those things. The scaffolding of this obstinate tradition, she writes. Let me share with you what I believe are 4 of the primary ways of understanding the foundations of Judaism in terms of why it's compelling. And again, as I said, these ideas pale in comparison to being able to live and experience them. Number one, a thought that we often do not hear, and I think that many children and young Jewish adults are never exposed to. Judaism is true. Judaism is real. When we say that something is true, we mean that it's real. We mean that it describes reality. Dennis Prager once mentioned that he had a radio show in Los Angeles with a rabbi, a priest, and a minister. He thought it would be the easiest show he ever had. He just let these three gentlemen talk. He could sit back and relax. And he had each of these three men explain and describe what they found compelling about their faith. And the minister explained how to him the Bible is true, and that the gospel is true, and that he feels redeemed through the teachings of the gospel. And the Catholic priest explained how the teachings of the church are true, and they're based upon truth, and how he feels that as a Catholic priest, he's a representative of the truth. And the rabbi leaned back and said that what he finds compelling about Judaism is he enjoys it. Dennis Prager was almost asleep, but he was shocked out of his sleep, and he had to interrupt the rabbi. To the rabbi, he said, that's all there is to it, that you enjoy Judaism? That it's like chocolate or strawberry? He expected the rabbi to explain the fact that Judaism is real. It's true. It's real and it's true that God took our people out of Egyptian slavery 3,300 plus years ago. This happened, and it happened with incredible supernatural miracles. It's true that our people stood on the desert floor at Mount Sinai 3,000 years ago, and the creator of the universe revealed himself to our ancestors. And it's incredible that all Christians and all Muslims agree that that's the truth. Christianity and Islam accept as axiomatic the fact that it's true. God took the Jewish people out of Egypt and revealed his Torah to them at Mount Sinai 3,300 years ago. If we need a reason to understand why Judaism is compelling, there's almost nothing as compelling in the world as reality and truth. It trumps what we happen to like and what we happen to enjoy. But unfortunately, for many, many Jewish people growing up, this is something they're not exposed to. It doesn't sound politically correct to speak about something being true and the truth. It's often scary to hear people talk like this. We think they're fanatics. But if that's what we believe as Jews, and that's our history, and that's our story, we don't dare shy away from it. We don't dare water it down in order to be more acceptable to the world at large, or to what we think is okay to proclaim. No. We have to be able to look at ourselves and look at our children and explain to them, Judaism is true. It's real. It happened. And at Mount Sinai 3,000 years ago, the most significant event in the history of the world took place. The creator of every molecule that exists revealed himself to our people. We hold a treasure. We got to think long and hard if we ever are going to even entertain the possibility of giving up that treasure. Number two, we are a people with a very critical and special mission to the world. When I was a young university student in the early 1970s, someone who was very idealistic, someone who thought that religions were evil because they divided people and caused strife in the world, someone who rejected Judaism for that very reason, I was challenged by classmates. I was challenged by Jewish classmates who said, wouldn't it make sense, before you reject Judaism forever, to first find out what it is, Michael? They were surprised by how I felt so strongly against Judaism, but knew virtually nothing about it. And so I felt that their challenge was legitimate. I was an open-minded person, and I felt that maybe it would make sense, before I really wrote something off forever, to first find out what it is. And I did that. I left university, and I went to a special school in New York that was established for young Jews that had no Jewish education. And there I learned something that was very inspiring to me. I learned for the first time in my life that I belong to a people who for the last 3,000 years have sacrificed, and sacrificed bitterly, for the most idealistic things in the world. We understand fully well today how idealism drives people. We see today what people are willing to do for ideals, especially when those ideals tell them that they're going to help make the world a better place. People who think that they are doing the right thing, people who feel that they're improving the world, are people that have dynamite, they have something powerful, they have explosive gasoline in their engines. We know that people are willing to wrap their entire lives around this kind of idealism. And for the first time in my life, I'm learning that Judaism is such a movement. We're a radically revolutionary movement of people who have been dedicated for over 3,000 years to fixing a broken world. That we as Jews believe that we have something very valuable and important to offer the world. We have teachings and values that can make this world a better place. The beginning of the story of Judaism is when God says to Abraham that I'm going to make you the father of a great nation, and through your people all of the entire world will be blessed. And so the Bible tells us that we, the Jewish people, are to be a holy nation and a kingdom of priests. We're to be a light unto the world. And the Jewish commitment to tikkun olam, to fixing the world, for many Jewish people, is an incredibly powerful idea that animates them and that they commit their lives to. 3, we do live in a world, and there are other people, and there's history. But at the end of the day, the existentialists tell us, we are alone. We're born alone, we die alone. Each one of us is an entire world unto ourselves. And so what Judaism asks as an ultimate question is, why are each one of us here? If there wasn't a world to fix, what would we be doing here? If there was no other world, just us, one person alone, why are we here in this world? What is the purpose of human existence? The Torah teaches us that each one of us is put here by a loving God to have absolute pleasure. Because just like every one of our parents, that's what they want for us. Our parents want our pleasure. Our parents want each one of us to have the most ultimately fulfilling and pleasurable life imaginable. The Creator of the world wants no less for each of us. And so the Torah teaches us that each one of us was put here to be able to have the ultimate pleasure available to a human being. What is that ultimate pleasure? Is it dark chocolate? Is it going to the Bahamas? And these are pleasurable things. But Judaism teaches us that there's a source for all of these pleasures. There's a creator of dark chocolate. There's a creator of the sunset that's so beautiful and awe-inspiring. There's a creator of all the beauty and wonder of this world. And so Judaism teaches us that the ultimate pleasure available to us as human beings is to attach ourselves to God, to be able to become one with God, what the Bible calls deveikut, attachment, The same word that the Torah uses when it says that therefore each person shall leave their mother and father and attach themselves to their spouse. The most intimate possible closeness the Bible describes as the marital unity. The Bible says that is what is supposed to happen between each one of us and God. That God as the ultimate is the ultimate pleasure. And so if we enjoy the dark chocolate, and we enjoy the sunset, and we enjoy the smile of a baby, and we enjoy love, there's an enjoyment, there's a pleasure that stems from connecting ourselves to the source of all of these other pleasures. And so Judaism says to us that it is compelling because it gives us the recipe for spiritual perfection. Judaism is not just the truth. It's not just reality. It's not just an incredible idealistic system to change the world. Judaism offers each of us the potential to self-actualize on a spiritual level and attach ourselves to God, to have a personal relationship with God. How many Jewish people have told me that growing up they never really heard much about God at all? They certainly never heard people speaking about getting close to God or feeling the presence of God in their lives. So God might have been a word that was said in a Hebrew school or synagogue, but God was not taken for real. And yet, how dare we remove the foundation of everything from Judaism? And finally, Judaism offers each one of us the most incredible technology for personal growth and self-actualization. Our rabbis teach that one of the main purposes of us being in this world is for us to grow as human beings. Not to stay stagnant through our lives, but to develop and grow and self-actualize and reach our potential. All of us can work on becoming people who are more grateful, becoming people who are more sensitive, becoming people who have more humility, becoming people who are more generous, becoming people who are dedicated, not to wasting their time in life, but to working on improving and changing and growing, to becoming bigger people. And Judaism provides the instruction manual of our Creator for how we can grow as human beings. When you think about it, these four ideas are the kinds of things that people in our world dedicate themselves to 1,000%. People dedicate themselves to the truth. You can't stop someone who is committed to the truth. People dedicate themselves to idealism. People dedicate themselves to spirituality. And people dedicate themselves to personal improvement. It's something that you can spend your entire life dedicated to. It's much more important than entertainment. It's much more important than travel. And I'm not diminishing the pleasure of those things. But we can never think of dedicating our life to entertainment. Although I once read about someone who on their tombstone had the epitaph, "He lived to bowl." How pathetic and how sad. Let me begin wrapping up. What I tried to develop tonight was the simple idea, that intermarriage is not the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. The problem is that we have not produced a generation of Jews who relate to Judaism as an ultimate idea. We've not produced a generation of Jews who are willing to sacrifice for Judaism because they feel that it's something that is so incredible that they want to wrap their entire life around it. And the only way we can produce such a generation is by ourselves becoming those kinds of people. When I was a student at Yeshiva University, every year Professor Chaim Sober put on a martial arts demonstration. One of the things that he did was demonstrate a technique called rooting. In this demonstration, the smallest student in the school, maybe 90 pounds, stood in a position with their legs apart, and they focused themselves mentally and physically, and they became rooted, planted in the floor. The next part of the demonstration, the 6th largest students in the school, big guys, were given the challenge, try to move that person even a half an inch. And they weren't able to. For me, this is a very powerful metaphor. That if we're able to get rooted as Jews, to build health, to build strength, to build a solid foundation, not to worry from the time children are 7 years old, we have to make sure they don't intermarry one day. But rather to focus on the joys of Judaism, the foundations of Judaism, the ideas of Judaism, the experiences of Judaism. Judaism sells itself. And if we're able to build a solid foundation, if we're able to give a generation of Jews strong Jewish roots, then not only will they not be moved by challenges like intermarriage, they won't be moved by many of the other challenges that face Jewish people in the world today. My hope and my prayer is that there will be a silver lining in this problem of intermarriage. As Rabbi Stern said, this is a very serious problem. Some demographers who study population growth and trends predict that by the year 2100, there may be less than 1 million Jews in North America. We're the only ethnic group in North America whose numbers are diminishing. So I believe that if there's any silver lining in this crisis, it's the possibility that it will serve as a wake-up call. You know, back in the 1970s, I believe it was, Men's Health magazine came out with a report that Philadelphia was the most overweight city in the United States. May have been the early 80s or the late 70s. What happened as a result of this magazine article in Men's Health magazine? It was not a very good report. As a result of this report, Philadelphia got very motivated. People started exercising. People started dieting. And they lost thousands and thousands of pounds. That article was a wake-up call for the city of Philadelphia. In 1990, when the demographers released their reports that the Jewish intermarriage rate had climbed over 50%, there was the beginnings of a wake-up in the Jewish community. There were meetings, and there were committees, and there were studies, and there were surveys, and there were reports about Jewish continuity. The word continuity was so prevalent and ubiquitous 20 years ago. Every single Jewish federation and Jewish organization, that's all they were talking about. There was a lot of talk. I'm not sure there's been a lot of real change. If anything positive can happen as a result of the crisis that we're going through, it will only be if it helps wake up our community. And so my blessing to all of us as a community, as individuals, as families, as synagogues, as Jewish institutions, we can turn this around. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We as a community can wake up. It's happened before. It's happened before. There have been revolutions, revivals in the Jewish world. If we have a generation still of people that are concerned about this, we have a generation of people that still have the ability to turn this boat around. We should see much nachas from our children and grandchildren in the years ahead, and I'll thank you all for coming tonight.